the high tensions on the border for a couple of examples. Let's go outnumbered overtime now. I'm Harris Faulkner. Again, Sarah Sanders expected to step up to the lectern that you see left screen right now at any moment. The president has gone after Robert Mueller this morning, just hours after the special counsel said former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort broke his plea deal by repeatedly lying to prosecutors. The president tweeted this. The phony witch hunt continues, but Mueller and his gang of angry Dems are only looking at one side, not the other. Wait until it comes out how horribly and viciously they are treating people, ruining lives for them, refusing to lie. Mueller is a conflicted prosecutor gone rogue. Sarah Sanders, again, expected to take questions on the administration's response to the crisis on the southern border with Mexico. As you know, border agents fired tear gas on rock-throwing migrants who rushed a major U.S. crossing from Mexico over the weekend. We should note, this will be the very first briefing since October 29th, the first since the White House implemented new guidelines for reporters. So things could get very interesting very quickly, as they always do, and our man navigating it in the room, Chief White House correspondent John Roberts, joins us live from the White House pressing room. Great to see you.
Harris, good afternoon to you. First briefing in almost a month, and clearly there's a lot for the press to talk with Sarah Sanders about. It's a full house, standing room only today. Clearly the Mueller investigation is going to be a big part of this because of what Mueller said in a joint status report together with attorneys for Paul Manafort, that he has been, according to the Mueller Special Investigator's Office, lying to investigators as part of his cooperation agreement, as part of a plea deal. In this joint status report, the Office of Special Counsel saying after signing the plea agreement, Manafort committed federal crimes by lying to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Special Counsel's Office on a variety of subject matters which constitute breaches of the agreement. The Manafort response: he believes he has provided truthful information and does not agree with the government's characterization or that he has breached the agreement. Given the conflict in the parties' positions, there is no reason to delay the sentencing herein, and he asked the courts to set a sentencing date in this matter. Manafort is in jail, but he was awaiting sentencing and was hoping to get some leniency by virtue of his cooperation agreement with the Special Counsel's Office. That all appears to be out the window now, and the president tweeting, quote, "The fake news media builds Bob Mueller up as a saint, when in actuality he is the exact opposite. He is doing tremendous damage to our criminal justice system, where he is only looking at one side and not the other. Heroes will come of this, and it won't be Mueller and his terrible gang of angry Democrats." At the same time as all of this was going on, the Guardian newspaper out of the UK reported that Manafort met on multiple occasions with WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, most recently as March of 2016, just before Manafort joined the Trump campaign. However, both WikiLeaks and people close to Manafort are denying this. In a tweet, WikiLeaks saying, "Remember this day when the Guardian permitted a serial fabricator to totally destroy the paper's reputation? WikiLeaks is willing to bet the Guardian $1 million and its editor's head that Manafort never met Assange." I'm also told by representatives close to Paul Manafort that they will soon put out a statement saying there was never any meeting between Paul Manafort and Julian Assange. As you can imagine, though, Harris, because he's in jail, he's not readily available by the telephone, so it's taking some time to get that statement together.
Well,
Harris?
and as our Pete Hegseth brought up on the couch on Outnumbered just a few minutes ago, he said that, you know, there were meetings with Assange before he joined the campaign, so there is some history there, and who's to say that that wasn't a continuation if, in fact, that's what happened with a further meeting or two? We don't know.
Well, again, their side, Manafort's side, is contending, and WikiLeaks, that there were never any meetings, let alone 3.
Interesting. Can we talk a little bit about the White House guidelines? Because we haven't seen a press briefing since October 29th. And I'm curious to know, I don't know of anybody who is yet to go back and forth with the White House and agree on this. How will today be different or not?
You know, I don't expect it's going to be any different than it was in the past. You know, guidelines, schmidelines, I think what a lot of people here are thinking. And, you know, people will comport themselves in the way to which they have become accustomed, and we'll see how it goes.
You know, some of the other things on the plate for today, just real quickly before I let you go, a lot has happened in the last couple of weeks, and you've got the last that we think of the Senate contest going on today with that runoff in Mississippi. So that might be something that comes up. You've got an enumeration in just the last few days from the White House of exact military spending from what the president put into the budget, which is also interesting because it has, you know, a lot of money for PTSD and health concerns for vets coming home. So there's a lot there.
There is, and I also think that we're probably going to hear a pre-briefing on the G20 from Larry Kudlow, at the very least, the chief economic advisor, perhaps John Bolton as well on the national security side. So if that is the way that this unfolds, any questions about Mueller and DHS and tear gassing at the border will likely have to wait until after the top of the briefing.
All right. We will be watching and covering it. As always, John Roberts, thank you for being where you are and helping us set it up. I want to bring in Republican Congressman Darrell Issa of California. He sits on the House Oversight, Judiciary, and Foreign Affairs Committees. Great to see you, Congressman. Can we talk just a little bit about Robert Mueller and where we think we are? You know, there haven't been a lot of leaks from his investigation. So why do people feel like this is wrapping up? And is that correct in your opinion?
Well, I think people feel it's wrapping up because there's no there, because he's prosecuted people on unrelated crimes, but he hasn't been able to create one indictment for something done by the Trump campaign. I think the other point is this whole Manafort thing coming out in the open, I think says a lot about, well, you know, they pressured him, they tried to get him to say something different than he said, and they finally gave up. And Manafort's going to begin his sentence for an unrelated crime, and they're sort of moving on. They've gotten whatever they're going to get from him, and they don't like it. And I think they're not liking it tells you that they don't have anything left.
Oh, that's interesting. Not liking. They're saying he lied every step of the way, but it could be also the contents of what he has said, as opposed to a narrative, is what I understand you saying.
And Harris, I think you're exactly right. They don't like what he said because it doesn't fit their narrative. They have a narrative that if he would say it, they would have probably a crime done by the campaign. What they don't have is they don't have what they wanted, which is somebody to say, yes, this happened, when in fact, even after he was facing prison, he's made it clear, it appears, that he knows of no crime by this campaign, and that's not what they want to hear. Yeah. And that does bring a conclusion to unless they've got some other rabbit hole to go down, they're out of rabbit holes.
You would know more about what it takes for a presidential pardon at this point. I mean, I know that it can't be a state adjudication. It's got to be at that federal level, is what I believe, if there is some way for there to be a pardon down the line.
Well, pardons are always done over a relatively long period of time with a separate recommendation by counsel as to the character of the person, the time. So I wouldn't expect anything right away, in spite of the president's belief that Manafort has been mistreated. And as you say, he can only pardon for a federal crime.
I want to draw everybody's attention, just give me a moment, Congressman, to the left side of the screen. You and I are sharing that screen right now on the other side. That is the lectern inside the White House press briefing room. And as Press Secretary Sarah Sanders steps up, we will take it live. So this is the first time that we've heard directly in this press briefing room since October 29th from the White House. So there are so many topics to get to. Congressman Darrell Issa of California is with me, and we are navigating down to the breaking news right now on the subject of the Russia investigation. You know, I don't know if you caught it, Congressman, but just in recent days, legal experts like an Alan Dershowitz said that the president should be worried politically about Bob Mueller's investigation. He didn't say criminally, he said politically. Why?
Well, because it's a political activity. You know, very clearly when you hire somebody to try to find not what happened, not an independent investigation, but try to find an alleged crime, by definition, it is in fact a political hunt. And that may be the challenge that Mueller faces, is that he was not given the ability to say, is there a there? He was supposed to find the there, and he hasn't done it.
All right. Darrell Issa, there's one last question that I have real quickly for you, sir, and that's about the border, because we're going to segue. Yeah. But you're in California, so I want to hit you with this first, with what's happening down at the border. Just a quick thought, Congressman.
You know, for years, almost once a year, I've gone down to the border, met with the Border Patrol agents throughout every administration. And the one thing you see is that they have to tolerate wrongdoing on a regular basis and make measured responses. And I think this is an example where rocks that could, in fact, kill them or maim them were being thrown, and they made a decision to use a non-lethal weapon, just tear gas, to try to thwart this criminal activity by people who say they want asylum. And I think we have to forget about the context of everything else that's going on. This is something that the men and women of the Border Patrol face daily, and they have to respond, and they're trained to respond. And hopefully we'll keep that out of the politics, because they did the minimum of what they had to do when they were being hit with lethal force.
All right. Congressman, great to see you. Thank you very much for your time today. And we are ticking down, obviously, to what's happening on the left side of the screen, and that is the White House press briefing. Breaking news right here on Outnumbered Overtime. For more, let's talk about what likely will come up as a topic, the administration's response to the border crisis, where Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen says they have confirmed there are more than 600 convicted criminals traveling with the migrant caravans. We are joined by Alfonso Aguilar, who served as chief of the U.S. Office of Citizenship under President George W. Bush. Thank you for being with me today.
Harry, it's good to see you again.
How is the administration, in your professional opinion, handling the crisis at the border?
Look, I think they're doing an outstanding job. It's time to send a clear message that entering the country illegally, much less storming across the border, it's not the way to enter the United States. It's not only dealing with those who are right outside of the border right now with this caravan, but also sending a message to immigrants who are thinking about it to dissuade them from entering the country irregularly. It's for their own safety. I mean, walking all the way from Honduras or Guatemala through Mexico to the United States is a very dangerous journey. We want to dissuade people from doing that. And what frustrates me is that Democrats are politicizing this issue, using this to attack Trump, rather than questioning the organizers of this caravan who are using these poor people, telling them, you know, get in the caravan, you're going to make it to the United States, and you're going to be able to ask a petition for asylum and stay in the United States. Well, the majority of them, the immense majority, don't qualify for asylum. They're using them to make a political point, and Democrats are not saying anything about it. It's shameful.
I want to get in on that economic. You said these poor people. Actually, that's very true. Some of them, many of them, have said to our reporters who have been embedded in that caravan over the last few weeks. William Lajeunesse had a long conversation with some of these people about their trek and the dangers of the trek, and many of them saying that it is for the poor economics in their countries. Should the government look at changing the rules for asylum? And if not, why not?
Well, no, because then anyone from any country who's facing economic problems or for a poor country could then ask for asylum. Asylum is very specifically, according to international law and our own U.S. law, for people who are being individually persecuted for reasons of race, religion, or politics. If your country's poor, that's terrible, but it's not a reason to petition for asylum. But they're being told by these organizers that they can ask for asylum and that they will be given a permit, a permiso, to stay in the country, and that they'll then will have to show up before an asylum officer and make their case. Now, to be fair, the majority, contrary to what some think, the majority do show up for their hearing, but depending on the year, from 20 to 40% don't show up. We've seen, based on Justice Department numbers, from 2012 to 2016, about 140,000 immigrants who had petitioned for asylum disappeared. That's not acceptable. So we really have to look at this seriously. The asylum system is being abused, and Democrats are not saying anything about it. Let me tell you.
It's so interesting. Why is there such a discrepancy in these numbers about asylum and who gets to stay and who is here? Some say it's 1 or 2%. Just real quickly, before I have to let you go, why does that exist?
Well, because people are not looking at the Justice Department numbers or Homeland Security numbers. If you look at the data, it's very clear. asylum is granted to no more than 10 or 20% of people who petition it. So those are the numbers from the government, and that's the reality. So telling people that they can come here and petition for asylum and that they're going to stay is just a lie. And these people, and you've seen the photos, people are getting in this journey, this very dangerous journey, in sandals, some people in wheelchairs, elderly people. That's cruel, but they're being used. They're pawns as part of this political game to make a political point to the Trump administration and the U.S. government.
All right. Alfonso Aguilar served as chief of the U.S. Office of Citizenship under President George W. Bush. Thank you very much for your time. No doubt this topic is about to come up as one of the things that the White House press briefing secretary will be tackling. Sarah Sanders is likely to face that issue and the Robert Mueller probe, the southern border showdown, tariffs, among other big topics. We will bring it to you live. And the president is holding 2 rallies, or did, in the final hours leading to the high-stakes Mississippi Senate runoff, which is underway. People are voting right now in that state. Will Republicans expand their Senate majority, or do Democrats have an opening in what has been an unpredictable race there? Live report with analysis. Stay close. We are awaiting the White House press briefing. President Trump has campaigned for Republican Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith during 2 rallies. It happened yesterday. And ahead of the Senate runoff in Mississippi, likely one of the things that could come up at this press briefing, voters are at the polls today. Democrat Mike Espy might have hope for an upset. That's what they're banking on the other side of the political aisle as the race has become closer than expected. Somewhat because Hyde-Smith made some controversial remarks, and both of them have done so. Let's bring in Hugo Gurdon, editorial director for the Washington Examiner. Hugo, great to see you. I do want to point out that there have been some gaffes on both sides of the political aisle here, as reports there in Mississippi, but Hyde-Smith sitting in a difficult lane going into this runoff.
You know, Harris, I think that she's probably in an easier lane than most people have tried to suggest. You know, there has been some effort to make what I think is probably a foregone conclusion into a cliffhanger. I suspect that Hyde-Smith will end up being the 53rd Senate seat for the Republicans and increase their majority in the Senate. It's important for the Democrats to make this seem like it's close, probably closer than it is, but even some of them suggest and admit that, frankly, Mike Espy would be a long shot.
You know, it's interesting, too, because this has been such a sticky election season with the vote counts and the recounts and, you know, and so when people watch this and they invest their time to go to the polls, that is the victory that isn't being celebrated here. I mean, the midterm election got a lot of people out.
Yeah, it did. And one of the things that's important, and I think this is one of the reasons which sort of adds to the tension in Mississippi, is that this is the runoff. This is the vote that counts. The fact that they voted, 3 weeks ago in the midterms is, that reduces it to the 2 candidates that we have, and they now need to vote. So both sides need to turn out their voters, and don't want to see a sort of loss of interest on their side simply because the midterms were 3 weeks ago. So, I mean, obviously, this is a very important vote. It would increase the Republican majority in the House for Mitch McConnell to 3 if Cindy Hyde-Smith wins. But of course, the Democrats have really done a pretty good job of making a lot out of a couple of rhetorical gaffes. They've sort of depicted Cindy Hyde-Smith as Cindy Jekyll and Hyde-Smith because of something she said which is interpreted as racially insensitive, and another comment that is seen as favoring suppression of votes by young people. But I think that at the end of this, unless there's something which the internal polls show, the reason that President Trump went down there and did a couple of rallies is not because he's worried or the Republicans are worried that Cindy Hyde-Smith is going to lose, but he'd quite like to run up the score and get it to double digits.
Oh, that's interesting. I haven't heard anybody say that specific thing. That this is not an actual save. This is an ad. And by the way, when I last had on Ronna McDaniel, the chairwoman of the RNC, we revisited the idea that what we've seen on the Republican side of the aisle with a pickup in the Senate and a midterm is historic.
Yeah, midterms generally produce victories for the out-of-power party. And look, the Republicans had a very favorable map this time. I think they were defending fewer than a half, nearly only a third of the number of seats that the Democrats had to defend. So the Republicans were on a great position, which is sort of to produce an unusual result for the midterms. And you could say that actually by picking up only 2, it was not a sort of, that showed that they were actually not performing as well as they might. And they certainly got some unfavorable voting from women in the suburbs in particular. But the map always favored them, and it produced what is historic in that the in-power party, the Republicans, picked up seats in the midterms. That's unusual.
You know, there has been a lot of criticism for Republicans not putting in funding for the president's wall, and how maybe the establishment hasn't had his back on that particular issue and others. What do you make of that?
You know, the wall is President Trump's, frankly, very blunt, and some people would say crude way of discussing the immigration problem. And there are a lot of Republicans who are kind of embarrassed by the way that he approaches this. The truth is that border security is already the law, and there's popular support for building a wall or making at least the border more secure. But it's something which more establishment Republicans have always found somewhat embarrassing, particularly because of the way that the president presents this.
All right. Again, we are awaiting the White House press briefing. Hugo Gurdon along from the Washington Examiner. Appreciate your time and your analysis here. Thank you. The White House press briefing set to begin at any moment. They've slid past their time atop the hour. So we will sit tight and bring this to you live. Just to put it into context, this is the first time the administration has held a briefing in nearly a month. October 29th was the last time. And it's the first time since the White House issued new guidelines for reporters. And John Roberts and I were talking at the top of the hour about how that might change things. He thinks none. No changes here. People will continue to do their jobs. Press Secretary Sarah Sanders will do her job. Plus, President Trump is going after General Motors today after that company announced a massive round of layoffs in the holiday season. Who gets the blame on that? Stay with us. A busy hour as we await the White House press briefing. President Trump lashed out at General Motors. No doubt you have heard the news, what they're doing in this holiday season. The company announcing yesterday it will cut 15% of its salaried workforce and shut down 5 plants across North America, including one in Lordstown, Ohio. The president spoke with GM CEO Mary Barra yesterday. Here's what he had to say about that conversation.
I was very tough. I spoke with her when I heard they were closing. And I said, you know, this country's done a lot for General Motors. You better get back in there soon. That's Ohio. And you better get back in there soon. They say the Chevy Cruze is not selling well. I say, well, then get a car that is selling well and put it back in. I have no doubt that in a not too distant future, they'll put something else. They better put something else in.
The president in his wheelhouse saying he was tough with that CEO. Let's bring in David Asman. You see him there on the screen. Host of Bulls and Bears over on our brother, the Fox Business Network. Wow. You talk with Mary Barra at GM and you get tough and say, remember what this country has done. What does he mean?
Well, this country bailed out GM, and we never got paid back. There are some bailouts, the bank bailouts, we got paid back most of the money that we put in. But GM still owes us taxpayers about $10 billion for what we did in saving them during the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. So, but I must admit, and I think a lot of people in Wall Street and the business community get nervous when presidents try to micromanage specific companies, whether it was JFK doing it to U.S. Steel or the way
I was going to say that
it's happened. There are plenty of precedents, but it usually does not end up well. I mean, look what happened with the bailouts. So, I mean, we ended up essentially subsidizing Fiat's takeover of Chrysler. That's how crazy things got.
So how could we have done that differently? Not to have too much revisionist history here and pretend like we weren't seeing things fall apart. But the president is saying, you know, look at what this country has done. Doesn't GM know?
GM knows it very well, and that's part of the problem. GM has been stuck on the edicts coming from the government, whether it was President Obama, who was pushing electric cars. Mary Barra is saying that she's going to close down some of the plants in Ohio in order to open up other plants that make electric cars. And some of those plants, by the way, are in China. That is really infuriating President Trump, the fact that GM may close down plants in Ohio to open plants in China. Now, we should mention, of course, Ohio was won by President Trump in the 2016 election. It's unlikely, or at least it would be very difficult for him to win re-election in 2020 without Ohio. So there is a lot of politicking going on. He's playing to the crowds in Ohio, but these are real workers who are going to be losing their jobs. There are about 1,600 workers in one town alone there, which has already lost a lot of jobs.
Can I ask you this, though? You know, one of the things that the president and the White House have said is that he made promises and he is keeping his promises.
Absolutely.
When you give the kind of money that in tax breaks these companies have seen, and they do something like this, Christmas season, 15% of a cut workforce. I mean, there are people who have been valuable and loyal to GM. Nothing lasts forever, but you're hearing reports today of some of their personal lives and things that are changing because of this. When you see all of this and you see the president, this is, as I said, his wheelhouse. Does he have a special way to get involved that maybe previous presidents haven't?
That's a good question. We're waiting for Act 2. Act 1 was what we saw yesterday, where he said, you're messing with the wrong guy and we're going to do something. The question is, what is that something? What would he do? Is this just talk in order to solidify his base, his political base in Ohio? I mean, he's now a politician. He was a businessman. He's always been a businessman, playing politician. Now he really is a politician. Yeah. So there's part of this. But what could he do? What could he take away? Could he force GM to put more money back from the loans? I mean, Lord knows there's a lot of questions now about whether what he said to GM might be said to other companies who are doing business in China. We should mention, by the way, GM's sales in China eclipse those sales of cars here in the United States. They make more money from the car sales in the United States in terms of...
But they sell more there.
But they sell more. The volume is greater.
Let's broaden this out a little bit, because people who are watching the left side of the screen, we are awaiting that press conference with Press Secretary Sarah Sanders to step up to the lectern at any moment now. And this is one of those topics, as we were seeing it come together yesterday, that I kind of had my eye on for a whole host of different reasons. And it isn't just the tax cuts, and it isn't just the 15% workforce. It is this idea that this president engages at such a level that we have never really seen before. He'll do it on Twitter. I don't know if anybody knows as much about Mary Barra coming to the White House yesterday. I mean, that CEO got called to the White House yesterday. We had that report hitting our alerts.
This is a president who takes everything very personally, as I see your press conference about to begin.
All right, Sarah Sanders, Press Secretary, White House. Let's watch together.
Lady will travel to Argentina for the G20 summit. President Trump's participation in the G20 summit is a key opportunity to reiterate his commitment to domestic and global economic growth and prosperity, cement relations with other world leaders, and advance a global economic system that is based on fair economic competition and free, fair, and reciprocal trade. While at the G20, the president and the delegation will interact with many leaders, including bilateral meetings with the president of Argentina, the president of Russia, prime minister of Japan, and the chancellor of Germany, and a working dinner with the president of China. To speak more about the G20 and what the president intends to accomplish, I'd like to welcome to the podium Director of National Economic Council Larry Kudlow, and following him, National Security Advisor Ambassador John Bolton. After their remarks, both will be available to take your questions on the G20 and other foreign policy news of the day, and then I'll be back up to take other questions on news of the day.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, everybody. Let me just walk through some quick themes, and then I want to mention some things the president talked to us just a little while ago. As Sarah said, G20, funny, it's not actually the G20 when we count it up properly. As Ambassador Bolton points out, it's much more than the G20. Now, in terms of the U.S. positions, we're going to use this as an opportunity to talk about our measures of tax cuts and deregulations and reskilling and job training and so forth that have generated significant economic growth and prosperity. That includes women's economic empowerment. As Sarah mentioned, free, fair, and reciprocal trade and trade reform. There'll be discussions of infrastructure, finance, and also the U.S. emergence as the dominant energy power in the world today, actually. In terms of the much discussed meeting, it's going to be a dinner meeting between President Trump and President Xi and representatives from both sides. It'll be bilateral. I want to just mention what President told us a short while ago, and that is, in his view, there's a good possibility that a deal can be made, and that he is open to that. He is open to that. But having said that, some caveats, as always. Certain conditions have to be met with respect to fairness and reciprocity, as we've said many times. For example, issues of intellectual property theft must be solved. Forced technology transfers must be solved. Significant tariffs and non-tariff barriers must be solved. Issues of ownership have to be solved. The President will probably reiterate his view. We want a world, ideally, of zero tariffs, zero non-tariff barriers, and zero subsidies. Now, whether they can get through all that remains to be seen, but that's the President's point of view, as I said just a little while ago. The U.S. is coming to the summit in very good shape. Our economy is quite strong. It's growing at 3% over the past year. Second quarter was 4.2, third quarter was 3.5, perhaps be revised upwards. We have a very strong holiday season, so-called Black Friday, very strong. We've had tremendous investments, business investments, energy investments, oil prices and gasoline prices coming down. That helps consumers, of course. We're in very good shape. China, not so good. I'm not here to critique or second-guess the Chinese economy, but most observers believe China to be in a slump, whereas the United States is in a very strong, solid position going into this summit. However, again, to repeat, the President said there is a good possibility that we can make a deal, and he is open to it. But on the other hand, if these conditions I mentioned a few moments ago are not met, not dealt with, the President has said, look, he's perfectly happy to stand on his tariff policies, which 10% last $200 billion, scheduled to go to 25%. That's not a certainty, but that's the schedule. And he has said, as recently as yesterday, the day before, if need be, if things don't work out in this U.S.-China summit meeting, he will invoke another $267 some odd billion in tariffs. That may not be the first choice. I'm just saying that is his view. If we can't get something done, and things have been moving very slowly between the two countries, until the President himself called President Xi and said, let's restart, let's try to get things going again. And then since then, he's made positive comments about that. So we will see. As I said, the key U.S. goals is around growth and prosperity. And, our economy is in good shape. Theirs is not. I'll just leave it right there. John, do you want to add stuff to that? Do you want me to take some questions? You sure? Okay, good. Let me take some questions and try to help out on this. Yes?
Mr. Cuddle, I'd like you to address some concerns recently from representatives of Italy and France and Germany who say that we're actually backing away from the national stage, and they fear that Russia will be the dominant economic force in Europe and the Middle East in the coming years. Could you address those concerns, A, and B, can you tell us a little bit, if you can, about the layoffs at GM?
Well, I'll talk to you about GM layoffs. Regarding the Russian story, I'm going to leave that to my longtime friend and colleague, John Bolton. I met with Mary Barra yesterday, and we had a lengthy conversation about the layoffs, the cause of the layoffs. It's a great disappointment, obviously. The President indicated his own disappointment. He believes, as frankly the Prime Minister of Canada, Trudeau, believes, that the USMCA deal was a great help to the automobile industry and to auto workers. And by the way, they made those statements separately. And yet, GM comes in right after the deal. By the way, that deal will be signed in Argentina with the U.S. And Canadian representatives. So there's great disappointment there. There's disappointment that it seems like GM would rather build its electric cars in China rather than in the United States. We are going to be looking at certain subsidies regarding electric cars and others, whether they should apply or not. I can't say anything final about that, but we're looking into it. Again, that reflects the president's own disappointment regarding these actions. Ms. Barrett told me, on the other hand, I want to be completely fair here, it's her business, it may be possible to transfer workers to other plants in Texas and Michigan. I'm not an expert on General Motors. I'm not an analyst, auto analyst, but that's what she said. But obviously, there's a lot of disappointment, even anger. I've heard it, again, from Mr. Trudeau, from President Trump, from Democrats and Republicans.
Just to follow, do you think it's going to adversely affect our economy coming into the Christmas season and after?
No. I mean, look, I don't want anybody to get laid off. I want workers to do very well. I want worker wages to do well, and they are. I mean, that's one of the great things. You know, there's a certain amount of pessimism that I'm reading about. Maybe it has to do with really a mild stock market correction. Let's not forget a couple weeks ago, just on this very point, we had 250,000 new jobs, which was a blockbuster number. Nobody really expected it. With a 3.1% yearly gain in wages and a 3.7% unemployment rate, those are very spiffy numbers by any benchmark in any metric. So again, holiday season layoffs from GM, brutal, all right? Very disappointing. Will it affect the overall economy? I don't think so. I do not think so. Yes?
Yeah, back to the question of the tariffs. If these talks with President Xi go nowhere, and we move forward with this escalation of the tariffs that you just described, which, correct me if I'm wrong, would be the biggest addition of tariffs that we've seen in your lifetime, what will the impact be on the U.S. economy? I mean,
that's a long period of time you mentioned. My lifetime.
But you've been a committed free trader for almost all of those years.
Yeah.
So what will be the impact on the U.S. economy if we see tariffs go up to the degree that you just described?
You know, we'll see what happens, okay? I don't want to presuppose anything. The president's going to make up his mind after the meeting. But I will say this. Our economy is in very good shape right now. And when you multiply through whatever numbers you want to use, 250 billion, or tack on another tranche, which may or may not happen, at a 10% tariff rate or more, it's really just a fraction of our economy. Okay, it's just a fraction of our economy. I'm not suggesting that there aren't winners and losers in that game. It's a complicated game. But on the other hand, I think we are in far better shape to weather this than the Chinese are. And I'll also say one thing. I appreciate your characterization. I am a free trader. But you have to ask yourself, this is what President Trump has been talking about, is it free trade when there's clear evidence of unfair and WTO illegal trading practices by China for several decades? Is that fair? Is that free? Is it free when intellectual property theft occurs, or when Chinese ownership of American companies force transference of technology from American companies to the Chinese companies? Is that fair? Or high tariffs on agriculture and industrial supplies? Is that fair? So President Trump is the first president in, I don't know, at least 20 years, and I'm including Democrats and Republicans, who not only has made this case, but continues to make this case forcefully and to take actions to defend American workers and our overall economy. Other presidents in both parties have raised the issue and then walked away from it. And President Trump obviously doesn't intend to. You know, this is under the heading, I think, for him of promises made, promises kept. It's something he's talked about for several years, and he now continues. If China will come to the table, or in this case, the dinner table, with some new ideas and some new attitudes and some new cooperation, as the president said, there's a good possibility they can make a deal. He's open to it. So nothing is written in cement or stone. But again, for a free trader, where's the free trade? And for several months now, since I've been here, President and I have talked about this. You know, we'd love to see a world of zero tariffs and zero non-tariff barriers and zero subsidies. We'd love to see that world. But unfortunately, we don't have that world, particularly with respect to China, but not only China. And so he's taking actions that he thinks will get us closer to that world. Let me go around. Yes, please.
Thanks. Just another GM question. When the president said yesterday they better damn well open a new plant there very quickly, was he just venting his frustration, or does he have some consequences in mind if they don't?
You know, I'm going to leave that to him. You may find additional announcements coming on that topic. Some more. Let me go in the back. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to ask you about what Ambassador Shui Tiankai said recently to the Wall Street Journal. Ambassador Shui Tiankai, the Chinese ambassador to the United States. His thought was that there would be a real risk to the global markets if there wasn't a deal, that they could become fragmented as well. How big are the stakes if you can't reach a deal?
Look, the ambassador makes a point. Now, if he would do his part, or his government would do their part, then we can all make a much better point. That's what President Trump is saying. I mean, I'll read you the quote again. There's a good possibility we can make a deal, and he's open to it. But certain conditions, you know, have to be met. Certain things have to be changed. And the president, again, in the spirit of promises made, promises kept, is going to defend, you know, the interests of American workers and ranchers and small businesses and the economy writ large. Let me just add one other point to this. The rest of the world agrees with us. I mean, we signed at the UN, for example, a trilateral agreement with the EU, the United States, and Japan. Worth looking at that document, which outlines, you know, what they call non-market abuses. Read China. Just recently, for to give an important speech. I'm not sure there was much new there, but in any case, just before that conference, with no prodding from the USA, the ambassadors, the French and German ambassadors to China, wrote a very tough piece going after, again, non-market, unfair, non-reciprocal trading practices. There is broad-based support for the American position here, which is China should change its practices and come into the community of responsible trading nations. They can do that, right? They're a major economy right now. It's not like they were 25 or 30 years ago. We would welcome it. The president has said he's happy to make a deal, but they have to take certain actions and give certain assurances. So, you know.
You'll spend the G20 getting that support around your position from other countries at the G20?
Oh, I'm sure we will. We have in many other forms. Just a couple more. I want Ambassador. Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Kudlow. Thank you. Yes, he was talking to me. Tariffs are, in effect, a tax on imported products that are paid for by the consumer. So does the president realize that these escalated tariffs are going to be paid for by the American citizens?
Well, look, he realizes the ramifications. As I said earlier, given the strength of our economy, given the size of our economy, we are in position to deal with this and handle this very well. That's the key point. And I'm not so sure about China, but I'll leave that to China experts and so forth and so on. The benefits, let me just look at the other side of the ledger. It's very important. The benefits of true free trade globally will be enormous. You know, if we go back to the idea of zero tariffs and zero non-tariff barriers and zero subsidies, if China plays by the rules, even the WTO rules, and all that needs reforming in our judgment, but they're violating those rules. If we do have a free trading system, or we move in the direction of a free trading system, a true free trading system, we will benefit enormously. Frankly, we will benefit, they will benefit, and the rest of the world will benefit. Now, free trade throws off enormous benefits when it's done properly in consistency and in a reciprocal manner. That's the key point the President emphasized. He's absolutely right. So, you know, I think of it as possibly a long rainbow here. At the end of that rainbow is a pot of gold. You open up that pot and you have prosperity for the rest of the world. But you got to get through that long rainbow. We're not there yet. We can get there. The President is reaching out. But we'll see how that works.
Sir?
Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Earlier, you mentioned low oil and gas prices as evidence that the president's economic policy is working. You mentioned the U.S. becoming the global dominant energy player. But merely days ago, the president said that it was necessary to let Saudi Arabia and its crown prince get away with ordering the murder of a Washington Post journalist because Saudi Arabia ensures low gas prices. Now, which one is it, sir?
I'm going to let Ambassador Bolton handle that question. I'm trying so hard to swim in my own lane, and I think John will help out with that whole discussion. He's sitting there much too calmly and quietly, so I want to get him up here. We've known each other a very long time. You're on, John.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. I don't really have much to add. Sarah gave you the list of bilaterals. Let me just update it a little bit because we're trying to fill every minute of the president's schedule. She said he's going to meet with President Macri, the host government of Argentina. He'll meet with President Moon of South Korea. He'll meet with President Erdogan of Turkey, Prime Minister Abe of Japan. That will transform at some point during that meeting into a trilateral meeting with the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi. And then, as Sarah said, the president will meet with President Putin and have a working dinner with President